I don't see how that is a matter of
Ladies
production.
and gentlemen, Mr.
Okay.
Cropper here in a
They used to
Zoom
be
meeting with people I don't
in any way,
know.
shape, or form apply to the Soviet economy.
But
and
here we
Well,
are.
no, I'm not saying. I'm saying
essay.
that. I never said that. I'm just saying like there's the whole point is like the problems of allocating without private ownership, and the Soviet Union did not allocate from from private ownership.
I mean, literally I would say, I'm not going to call it an axiom. I'd say the fundamental basis of all forms of economics, whether it's Keynesian, Marxist, Austrian, whatever, is always the scarcity. I mean, the allocation of scarce resources. The problem here is that what is the antecedent of allocating scarce resources? You need to have scarce resources. And they always claim, because we have scarce resources, therefore we should allocate in this particular manner, which derives the existence of Marx, which derived the existence of Austrian economics, and so on and so forth. But if it's scarce resources, my thing is, why don't we find the best economic system to allow production? That would be capitalism. I don't understand this whole dichotomy of economics here.
I think that it would be good to start by defining money, because I bet that would lay bare some misconceptions. Does anybody want to try to define money?
Yeah, okay. So what do you mean by defining money? Money is simply an intermediary good upon which goods are exchanged in like an economy. Like, okay, so like, okay, if you want to talk about like how money came into existence, okay, I can talk about like money theory and how money came into existence, and that being
Wait, are we talking about like paper money? Because that was made up by someone who wanted to value goods and stuff.
No, paper money is not money.
Paper money is simply a representation of like, so people don't have to carry around like bags of gold. It's like, it was simply a representation of a commodity. So there's commodity money, and then there's stuff like fiat money, and then like, so you have like money in the broader sense, and then you have money in like the narrow sense, and you have stuff like physical money, then you have like fiduciary media, stuff that money substitutes. So things that are not actually money, but they can be substituted like for money, in a sense, like they exchange as if they're money, but they're not money. But money itself came from, so you have like a direct exchange, like say in like a barter economy. If I trade you an apple for a chicken, whatever, that's a direct exchange. But if you're talking about like, there's three parties, so an indirect exchange would be like, you have a chicken, I have a cow, and this guy over here has an axe. Well, I want your chicken, but you don't want my cow. You want the axe, but the guy with the axe wants my cow. So I trade my cow for the axe for the chickens. Now we all got what we wanted. It's an indirect exchange. I exchanged a product for not because I actually wanted that product, but exchanging it as an intermediary good. So I use that axe as an intermediary good. So then, like, you can trace back from like the very first like indirect exchange, as the theory goes, that essentially people started just using things that were liquid. Liquid meaning like I could exchange them. People wanted them. Something like say tobacco leaves. Tobacco leaves would be like something like there would be a high demand for them. So like I could trade them for a product, or I could get like tobacco leaves, not because maybe I don't smoke tobacco, but I knew that I could offload them easily to somebody who did want tobacco and maybe exchange that for a good that I did want. So like it all, and then like the reason that the hypothesis that the reason like gold and silver came into play was because they were goods that for the most part have like a value outside of just using it as a medium of exchange. Like people want it for jewelry, or people want it whatever, and if they can stop using it as, so like say you have like jewelry and then you need it as money, you could just smelt it back down into its original form, trade it as money. It's easily divisible. It's easily like, so essentially it was just exchanged because it became a common medium of exchange because it was something that people wanted. It was liquid, easily divisible, and people could use it as as an intermediary. That's all money is an intermediary substance upon which we exchange goods. And literally, so like the theory goes that the value of money today is based off the value of money yesterday. We can purchase things with money today based off of like the expectation that we could purchase them with things with the money yesterday. And then it goes back and all the way until like you trace that all the way back to like the first indirect exchange. Like if you like were to create like a fiat currency out of thin air that it was not like juxtaposed to any like current currency system, it would not ever like exchange for anything because there would be no way to like formulate the value of money. Like the value of money like proceeds all the way back to like the original like indirect exchanges. That's why like every monetary system, like even once we moved off of a fiat system, or I'm sorry, moved off of the gold standard, the value of the money was from day to day. Like say like we ended off the gold standard today. And we trade things with that money tomorrow. Like even though we're not on the gold standard tomorrow, we still buy things with that money because it had the value yesterday.
Well,
like just because we left it.
This definition's getting a little long-winded. Can we do a shorter one?
Yeah, money is an intermediary object upon which we exchange commodities.
I would like to propose that money is a token that shows that you have given goods or services to somebody and you now have a claim on goods and services. Is there any other?
So like so like if we're talking about like.
Is there any other way to get money besides serving people?
Yes. So like especially if you're talking about like commodity money, say like I go and I know some of you will be opposed to like homestead, the idea of homesteading. But like say I go and like I homestead this land and I go dig and I find gold.
That's service. That's a service. You're serving society because society wants gold or they want the wheat or the cows off of your farm. So if you go and improve land so that it is productive, you're serving society.
Okay.
So money is a token that says you have served society.
Sure.
All right. Well, that might not set very well with Marxists or anarchists because it's an objective definition of money. Well, I propose that as a definition. Does anybody, you accept it, but does anybody have anything to say against that idea of money? Zane accepts it. Is or is not money just a token that says you have served others?
I wouldn't say it's just a token. I would say that it is a token, but I think it goes beyond that. Because money itself has no value, has no meaning, unless we could trace it back to like its original commodity exchange form.
It has no meaning or value without goods and services being available. Like
right.
A whole chest of gold on a desert island is useless because there's no people to trade it to.
Right.
So money requires work.
Well, unless you build a house out of gold, and that protects you from the elements.
Fair enough. But money indicates that you have done work, and now you have a claim against other people's work. So, if you have millions of dollars, that means...
Well, you only have a claim against other people's work if they're willing to accept because it's not like I can't just give you money and say you have to give me...
I didn't say you have a right. I said you have a claim. So, you can go and offer them the gold that you have dug out of the ground and mined yourself, and they want that gold. By the way, because gold is chemically inert, that's why the ancient cavemen were obsessed with it, because everything else rusted and corroded away, but gold didn't. So it seemed magical to them. They had no reason, they had no way to understand what was really going on, but its chemical inertness is the source of its value.
Yo, Ryan. You here, Ryan?
Tree.
I guess he's inactive? Yeah, Cropper.
So
Hold on. Yeah, Tree of Liberty might be one that you might be interested in, most likely. But I think he's inactive for some reason. I mean,
I was just curious as okay, so like, I feel like, where exactly are you going with this? This is what I.
Where am I going with the money thing?
Yeah.
If a person has millions of dollars, that means they've provided extreme services or goods to society. That means that they deserve a lot of credit. And they deserve a vast amount of goods or services from society for whatever they've given society. Now, of course, you can rape and rob and plunder, and that's not legitimately earned. And fair enough point, but leaving that aside, if you deal voluntarily with people and you earn millions of dollars, you are far from being a robber baron. You are actually a very, very great benefactor to society.
What I understand is you're trying to use your definition as like a refutation of like Marxism. Like
The existence of money itself is a refutation of Marxism. Yes.
Okay, but and I would agree with you. However, obviously they don't look at it as a, and obviously I agree. I think that those are voluntary transactions. Me going to work for somebody, regardless of whether I starve or not, that's a critique of nature, not of a certain system. However, they don't view it that like they view that these people. So like when you say like, oh, it's apparent to you that if they have all this money that they provided a great service to the people, well, they would just argue that they exploited people in order to accumulate that wealth, and therefore they didn't actually provide the full services that money was accumulated based off of the services their laborers were providing, and that they extracted the surplus value from. So I don't understand. I get what you're saying, but I'm saying like from a Marxist point of view, I don't think that's going to mean anything to them. Just like in your own definition of like money, because I don't think that's going to mean anything to them, because they don't view like the capitalist as somebody who has voluntarily and ethically staked a claim to this money, like you said, like provided that.
Yeah, you're saying that a confused person would not accept an objective definition. Fair point. True. They are confused. Right. They have no idea what money really is. So when we give them an objective definition, they're not going to accept that, of course. Yeah. But yeah, I guess I would have to hear their argument. Of course, it would be ill-founded, but I would have to hear what they have to say.
Well, I could LARP as a Marxist if you want to. If you want me to, I've read a bit of Marx.
What are you going to say, that that you're forced to work at my factory from your lack of food, and that it's not a voluntary interaction?
That's pretty much what they say most of the time. Yep.
And I'd say you're lucky that factory's there to give you anything at all.
Yeah, I would argue the same. But so yeah, I mean, it typically comes along the line of like, even if it's a voluntary transaction, then they would get into the discussion about like the labor theory of value, and where like I guess interest theory, and where the surplus value comes from. So if I'm being a Marxist here, I would say that all value is derived from the labor inputs in a commodity. A commodity is determined based off of whether it satisfies a use value. If it satisfies a use value, it's exchanged upon its labor inputs, the congealed labor inside the commodity.
Yeah.
And therefore, if a commodity were to exchange for more than its labor input, therefore, if a capitalist were to be making a profit, inherently.
You want to violate our.
All right, hold on. I'm about to kick this guy.
We've got a recreational nuke pointed right at you.
All right.
Inherently, they would have to be paying paying the laborer less than the value they provided for the commodity, and then they added to the product.
Yeah. Then
from their point of, that would be the only way that they extracted that.
Well, then labor. We can define profit as the money left over from.
Right, but there would be, so if they think from their point of view, right, that there wouldn't be money left over if the laborer was being adequately paid for what he added into the commodity.
But the adequate payment depends on what the laborer agrees to in a voluntary society. So they are just saying. And
I would just go back to, even if I agreed to something, it's I agree to that or I starve.
Yeah, but in a voluntary society, what people care to sell their labor as is their business, and some Marxist cannot step in the middle of that and say, no, you can't sell your labor. I mean, that's what they do. That's what minimum wage laws are. But that doesn't change the fact that money is what it is, and voluntary.
So are you conceding that value is derived from labor?
No, of course. Okay. Labor creates no value.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because you kind of didn't really, like, we were talking about like the theory of value, and you kind of just said like that even like I guess what you were saying is, even if labor was, or value was driven from labor, it wouldn't really matter because the laborer voluntarily decides what he gets paid.
Yeah. No, labor creates no value. If labor created value, then we could move rocks from one place to another and back again, and we would have value.
Right. Commodities can't exist without labor.
True, but labor itself is not a value. You have to know where to pile the rocks and why to pile them and in what way to pile them to make a house.
Okay, but even if you know where to pile them and how to pile them, if there's no labor to pile them, then the pile of rocks never comes into existence.
My point is you can have labor without thought, and that would create no value. But you cannot have.
And yes, that doesn't actually say anything about the labor theory of value, because in that sense, the commodity, it wouldn't be a commodity because it satisfies no use value. So it's not a commodity.
How do we get it to satisfy a use value unless we think about what we're doing and plan ahead? And that's not labor.
It's labor of the mind.
It's management, and they do not call that labor.
That would definitely be labor. Okay, so if I see a necessity, right? Like if I see that my community needs a house or whatever, me thinking about that is in its own right some sort of laboring. I'm laboring in order to think about these things, in order to come up with these ideas, and then I go and act upon the labor that I've already derived, or the idea that I've derived.
Well, that's a slippery slope to where you say a person who has a pile of capital is doing labor by deciding where to allocate that capital. So there, labor creates value.
Yeah,
so
that's what I would agree, or I wouldn't agree, but I'm just saying, like, that doesn't say anything to me. Like
if the Marxists are willing to go that far, saying that thought is labor, then a person who thinks about where to put their money is doing labor and creating value. So they're on if that's true that they would accept that, then they're on a slippery slope to saying capitalists create value by allocating capital.
Excuse me.
And so be it. That there's no reason they shouldn't be in a
I don't actually.
contradiction.
I can't actually tell you if they would think of like thought as labor or not. I would just kind of just going off on like a tangent there. I don't actually know if they would conceive that was or was not.
Well,
but even let's go back. Like even if thought itself isn't labor, so like we can determine that there are many like variables that for a commodity to come into existence. Like it can't exist without the like the materials that are put into it. If they didn't exist, the commodity itself can't exist. If I didn't think about the commodity that I want to make, it can't exist. And if I don't put labor into it, it can't exist. But first, if it didn't exist, I would never have thought about it. So there's no way to actually derive any value from that. And second of all, like just I can't actually quantify like the thinking of it. There's no way to actually quantify that. However, labor you can quantify. So I would say that the only like justifiable position would be to derive that. The labor, or because even you're talking about like, okay, when a commodity first comes into existence, what if the commodity already exists and then I'm just making more units of the commodity? I'm not actually thinking, I'm simply mixing labor with materials, which those materials only have value because of the labor that it takes to get those materials.
Which still requires thinking.
Okay.
Yeah, and if let's say you're manufacturing bicycles, which are not an innovation, you are going to be remunerated in proportion to the amount of value you're providing. So people are just going to pay you a normal price for your bikes. If, however, you create something completely new, like airplanes or Teslas, then you're going to be remunerated much more handsomely. So it's true that you can't
I would argue that airplanes and Teslas rely on more scarce resources, and by scarce I mean it takes more labor in order to get those, because for example diamonds are harder to find, so you have to mine longer for diamonds than say something like iron. So if a airplane is predicated upon or a Tesla, like lithium batteries for example, it takes a lot of labor to get those things. If it's like a brand new innovation, typically it would be a new innovation predicated upon like a high allocation of like scarce resources, and therefore it would be valued more because of it.
Yeah, and just on a side note, 90% of the value of diamonds is in the labor it takes to finish them.
And that's accounted for in the labor theory of value. It's not just like it's congealed until like it becomes from the time it's a production product to when it's consumed, and as a consumer product, even the salesperson that is laboring in order to get you to buy the commodity could in its own right be seen as I wouldn't necessarily argue that, because they didn't actually bring about the commodity itself. However, I think some would view it as anybody in the laboring process from the time from getting into the ground to get it to it being finished.
I have a question. What gives labor intrinsic value?
The buyer.
Labor has intrinsic value because nothing can exist without labor, and therefore we cannot exist without labor. So I would say life is valuable, and since life is valuable, or you could say life isn't valuable, but I would argue that life is valuable, and therefore if life is valuable and labor is a necessity to sustain life, I would say labor is valuable.
I would say the purchaser gives value to labor, whoever's going to purchase the good or service, and they value it based on their own values. So if an apple is important to somebody, they might pay more. If they're starving to death, they might pay a lot for an apple.
Well, that's price and value are different things, right? Like.
It's more valuable to you the more you need it or the more you want it. And people have different needs and wants. So value depends on the purchaser.
Okay, so all that would be it satisfies a higher use value. So those people would be able to, in that current time, we're talking for like, okay, so when Marx is looking at these things, at like how commodities exchange, he's looking at like an equilibrium. So while one individual might be willing to pay more or less for or not pay, like say exchange, more or less of a commodity, like so he derives that like for two commodities to exchange, that the only thing that they can be derived from is their labor, and therefore they would exchange upon their labor and in equilibrium. It doesn't necessarily mean that there wouldn't be outliers for like supply and demand and things like that of that nature.
Yeah. If you're standing in front of the grocery store trying to sell me a candy bar for $10, I'm probably not interested. But if we're at a rock concert and there are no concession stands and I'm starving and you offer me a candy bar for $10, I might take it.
Sure.
So it does depend on the value to the purchaser.
Yeah, it depends on the value to the purchaser, but I would say that that's not equilibrium. Like and that has to do with supply and demand. There's a low supply at the concert and a high demand. Therefore, you would be willing to exchange more for it. But if we're talking about an equilibrium where supply and demand are equal, right, then I would say that in instances like that don't really refute the idea that the item itself is predicated upon its labor and therefore cannot exist without its labor, and exchanges based off of the value of its labor. I mean, this is actually like something that can be observed in modern day. Like if we actually look at like input-output tables that companies put out, like there's a strong, this is correlation, not causality, I understand this.
Well,
there's a very, very strong, like a 9-to-1 correlation between labor inputs and the outputs of the commodity.
Well, the labor input doesn't matter if nobody values the commodity. I mean,
sure. Then it satisfies no use value, and therefore it's not a commodity.
But labor went into it. So labor.
Yeah, but it didn't satisfy. But the labor theory of value is predicated upon the commodity satisfying a use value. If it doesn't satisfy a use value, then it's not a commodity. Therefore, okay. So like, think of it this way: like, so we have the exchange value, the labor inputs, and the use value. Even if you have labor inputs to put into, like, if there is no use value, think of it like an on and off switch. If it satisfies no use value, then it actually has no exchange value because it's not a commodity. However, if that use value is satisfied, so you're saying, well, if they don't value it, well, then it satisfies no use value. Therefore, it's not a commodity. Therefore, like it wouldn't exchange upon its like labor inputs because the commodity itself satisfies no use value.
So
however, the use value is different from what it exchanges it.
You're saying the value depends on the purchaser.
Yes. So the value depends on a purchaser as whether it's like if it satisfies a use value or not, right? But it's the exchange rate. The exchange rate is set in an equilibrium based off of the labor inputs of the commodity. I'm probably doing really terribly right now. I'm LARPing as a commie, and I haven't read like that much Marx.
Yeah, I want to go back to the original context. I'm quite curious of like the objective definition of money, of how you did say that goes against Marx, of course. But I'm kind of curious how that goes against anarchy, as you previously claimed.
Because anarchy is just Marxism with a lot of crappy makeup on.
You mean like anarchy, like anarchy in the traditional sense, like pre-Rothbard, like you mean like anarchism as in like the sense of like anarcho-communism, or how like Peter Kropotkin anarchy, or like all anarchy?
Well, I would challenge you to find an anarchist who didn't have misconceptions about economics the same way that Marxists do. So I would lump them together pretty fiercely, I'm afraid.
Okay. So how do you define like anarchy?
Um, Anarchy is a belief in the rule of the strongest.
So would you like to expand upon that for me?
If you don't have an authority who is has the exclusive monopoly on physical force, then you have anarchy. All out
Okay.
war. All out war.
All out war, you think?
Anarchy
And
is 1941 through 44 from the border of France to the Kamchatka Peninsula, just above Japan. That whole region was in anarchy from 1941 to 44. And
interesting.
if if you're the strongest, then you win.
Okay, so if you are the strongest, then you could say that you hold a monopoly on over the force over a given territory. Therefore, it is a state. Therefore, it's not anarchy.
Well, eventually there was a winner, and then anarchy ended. Yeah, I wouldn't say that.
Okay,
the
but
Soviet...
but even if there were warring states, essentially they had the monopoly of force over the area that they were warring from with the other area. So like maybe it was just a smaller state, right? But then they eventually they conquered these people, and therefore it was a bigger state. But it was never actually stateless because there was always somebody that held that monopoly on force in that area.
Yeah, I don't think they had a monopoly on force. Germany didn't have a monopoly on force within its borders because we were dropping bombs on them all the time. We got to use force within their borders too. So
Okay, and they retaliated, right?
yeah.
Okay, so would you say that Germany was not a state? There was no state of Germany during World War II because we were operating within their borders and we were dropping bombs on them?
I think that that's pretty strong. You're steel manning my position to the maximum. Yeah.
Okay, so if I lived in Germany at that time and I had, say, I stole from somebody, who is arresting me? Is it the Americans
No, it would
that are dropping bombs?
Right, definitely be the Germans, but it's
Okay,
just...
so they still hold that monopoly over that territory. Whether somebody can threaten that monopoly, but like if you're talking about if I'm within the borders of the like, okay, so technically all I'm doing when I'm flying over and dropping bombs is I'm transgressing against that monopoly, and therefore the Germans, from their own perspective, have a right to retaliate against me, which is what they did, try and shoot down the planes or advance whatever. But like if I'm like operating from like within the, like if I'm a person within the borders of Germany at that time, I'm still subject to the force of Germany.
Yeah, because they were the strongest within that area for a while,
Right.
And then they weren't.
Okay,
Then
right.
Moscow and America and France and Britain were there. So
Okay, and if they were occupying the area, and so like say they were occupying, I'm not like amazing on like World War II history, so I don't really know like the events that occurred. But I'm just saying, in a hypothetical situation where, say, like the British occupying the colonies, if the British are occupying the colonies and have force over that area, and therefore they jurisdict what the rules are for that area, I would say that that is still a state. It's just a state, even if it's within the borders of Germany, it's a state under the rule of somebody else.
yeah,
Wait, wouldn't that mean that private property is inherently a state?
no.
Yes and no. I don't believe that it's inherently a state because even if you come onto my property, if you don't like transgress against me, right? Like I can't just like write a law or like in like private contractual law or whatever. I can't just say if you step foot on my property accidentally, I can shoot you, right? Like I don't actually like I can't just aggress just simply based off of like some arbitrary like well you could, I mean theoretically like I could do that now. however you're going to.
You would be subject to the law.
Right.
Because
Well,
you do
subject
not
to-
have
well-
you don't have a monopoly on force just because you have some property within an area where you do not have a monopoly on force.
He's saying like so say theoretically, hypothetically, let's forget like the warlord argument for a second. Like hypothetically, in an ANCAP society where it is quite literally just individual pieces of private property in which you are technically like. And
there's no
overarching
private
government.
property in an ANCAP society. There would be no private property. Private property
is
is an
that?
institution of law. Private property is when there's an authority that has a monopoly on force and it protects your right to that
Private property is simply predicated upon somebody else. So for example, like I would agree, like if I'm alone on an island, right, and I harvest a coconut, technically speaking, that coconut isn't property. There's no third party in which to agree that is property. However, I would argue, like, I don't think that is property. I think that is just something like, now if a third party were to come into this situation, I think that would be property, because property has to be recognized, but I don't think it has to be recognized by a central authority. Like if, for example, like if my neighbor recognizes that I own something, right? Or if the society recognizes, if we set like a standard for recognition.
Yeah, that would be a monopoly on the use of force that you would be recognized
From who?
through.
From who?
I don't know what those words mean. From who? I mean.
So, okay, so who holds the monopoly?
The state within that area.
I'm probably not explaining this the best, but I don't think you're exactly picking up what I'm putting down. But I don't think I'm doing a good job of explaining it either, so I'm not holding it against you.
I think his argument was private property is a legal term. Like that's
Yes.
kind of
Okay.
I don't know, like
Yeah, and if you do away with the laws, then private property is no longer a concept. It's just rule of the strongest.
There still can be a private firm that sets certain rules and recognizes property by certain rules.
What's rules mean? Rules mean you have to enforce them, which means you have to have an army with guns. So it's monopoly on the use of force. You're just using kindergarten words.
Well, you can still enforce it. Just you don't need a huge army. You just need to be capable to protect the property proportionate to the property itself.
Well, that's not an argument against what I said.
What? I know.
That's
I'm
not
just
an
saying.
argument against what I said. I said that
I
there
know,
was a
I'm
monopoly
just
on
saying.
force that creates private property, and you said,
Right.
well, it doesn't have to be a very big army. Well, that's not the
Right.
point.
Okay, so like it can be as little as one guy with a gun to X amount guys with guns. You just need to be capable capable of force
What?
in order to protect private property.
True.
Like yourself, you can you don't even need a secondary institution to
It's not.
recognize
It's
the
not
property.
private property if you're standing there with a gun and it's just you and your gun, and that's the only thing that protects your property. That's like your little kingdom. That's not private property. You're saying within the borders of my ranch, I'll kill you if you come in here. That's not private property. If you could call the cops when somebody comes onto your ranch, that would be private property. But you're talking about just having a little kingdom of your own where you are the ruling force.
Well, property is just an object with the right to possess or use. So
Where does a
I-
right to possess or use come from if not from the government enforcing it?
it's a logical, it is just a definition.
Then that.
Oh,
Well, then that
definitions.
means-
Definitions have nothing to do
Wait,
with reality,
no,
huh?
then by that logic, that means you need a government for the axiom of self-ownership.
I'm not arguing
Self-ownership's
the axiom.
not an axiom.
I'm not arguing. It's not an axiom. I'm not arguing the axiom.
No, I'm not talking to you. I'm saying
Okay.
he said if rights are not enforced by the government, then there isn't rights.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, if ownership is the right to possess or use, that's just the definition. That implies that there's someone who recognizes this right to possess or use, and all that would necessitate is a person to say, yes, he has a right to do that. He has a right to hold that. And any aggression on that ownership would be just a forceful taking of his possession. So the only way to protect your ownership, or the only thing that would be necessary to protect ownership, is just to be capable of defense.
Sufficient
be
physical
anybody.
force, right?
It doesn't have to be a state. It just has to be someone who both recognizes that you have the right to possess or use this property, and they're capable of defending it.
Well, you're just defining fiefdoms.
A fiefdom is just
that's just a little state.
It's just land owned by a lord.
Or kingdom. Yeah, you would be the lord of your little kingdom. If there's no overarching state to protect you, you just say, I recognize my rights on this piece of land, and you can't violate my rights on this piece of land because I will enforce my rights. Then you're just saying you have a kingdom and you're the king.
Well, if you have the right to possess or use your own property, you have every right to that property in every manner. Nobody else does. If you have the right to possess that
where
property.
Does that right come from if it's not enforced by a government?
It can come from anyone that recognizes it. It's not the recognition isn't necessitated by a government. It's necessitated by a person capable of recognizing.
And what if somebody comes along that doesn't recognize it? Then you just have to fight them, right?
Well, you may, but all conflict doesn't necessitate violence.
Yeah, but let's say that this one did. Let's say this one did, and they came and they wanted to take your ranch away. What would you do? Call the police or the army? No, because there's no authority that gives you your rights, apparently. You would just have to fight them.
That's not true. That's not true. That's not even. Well, first of all, like
no,
if
there
I
are
said like
private security producers.
What the fuck is a private security producer besides Stalin and Hitler? They produced their own private security forces and they did whatever they wanted with them.
Okay, so what I'm saying, so you asked a question, like you posed a hypothetical, and somebody were to come onto your property and say, like, if you were to set like a yes.
Sorry for interrupting you, but I wanted to talk about his point with Stalin and Hitler about private property and private security producers. Private security producers and anarcho-capitalism leads to institutionalization that would lead to the incentive to uphold the law.
What law? You got to make up your mind. You got laws or not? Is there an overarching state that provides the monopoly of force, or is there not?
Anarchy doesn't mean that there's no law. There can be multiple firms that provide their own law. There can be
well, that was Hitler providing one law and Stalin providing another law. So yeah, they had multiple firms. They were institutions, and they tried to enforce their laws.
The difference is one is commodified and one is not.
Well, commodification comes about because of the protection of individual rights. So,
commodification is just
checkmate.
It just manifests when there's exchange.
Yeah, exchange happens when both parties are not allowed to use physical force because somebody else has the monopoly on physical force. Otherwise, it's just you're lucky if the guy didn't rob you and he actually traded with you. You're just lucky.
Well, I would say.
So you would argue like people don't steal not because they think stealing is bad, but because big man at the government says stealing is bad.
A lot of people.
Because he set that precedent.
A lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people. Yeah, of course.
Okay, so I would disagree here. Because I think that people that commit crimes are going to commit crimes anyways. I mean, like obviously I understand you said not everybody, but I would agree that I think like if you were to say a lot of people or a majority of people, I think that would be an arbitrary conclusion that I think.
All right. Let me give you.
There's no like absence like substance to that claim other than like you think that without the law that people would just be subject to, well, are you going to use force against me or not?
Yes.
I would say
let me give you an example. I'm on my ranch.
Can I finish?
Well, I would like to answer the point you've made.
Go ahead.
I'm on my ranch, and the United States government has fallen because Trump's been taken out or whatever, and there are no state governments, and everything's in a state of anarchy. And I'm on my ranch, and there are no police to call because they've been defunded. And I see a group of people walking along my fence line. Now, why should I not kill them? Why should I not just take my gun out and kill them on the off chance that they are just snooping around to try to get onto my land? Why should I not kill them?
You shouldn't kill them because they've done nothing to you to provide.
They have. They're walking along my border.
No, they're not aggressing.
It seems like they might be. To me.
Okay, well, what are they doing?
They're walking along my border.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Where do you get the thought that they might start to aggress?
Because people are looting and rioting all over the place.
Oh, well, I mean, then that's a perfectly good reason to defend yourself.
There you go. I'm not defending myself. They haven't attacked me, but they might attack me. So I'm going to do a preemptive action, and I'm just going to mow them down.
This is begging the question. This happens now. Like, this happens even with the existence of a state. Like, okay, so like there's looting and rioting going on right now. Would you say that these cities are in anarchy? Even though like people are getting...
Trump even said he was going to...
I would disagree that these cities are in anarchy, but even in the instance, like, looting and rioting happens within a system that has authority over violence. Like, there is authority over violence, whether they're using that authority or not, which I would say that they are taking repercussions against these people. I would say that maybe under the current context of where we're at now, they're not using it appropriately, but that's kind of moot. They have a monopoly on the use of force and violence. People are still looting. People are still rioting. And the same situation that you presented to me could be presented in the current state of America, where looting and rioting is going on in my city. I see people coming onto my property, and I get sketched out. I think that they might aggress against me, and I defend my home, defend my property. I don't look. It's not like something that's innate to anarchism or anarcho-capital or whatever you want to call it. It's like it doesn't answer itself within a stated society.
Well, my point stands that you don't have rights unless there's an overarching government. You're just simply protecting your own little kingdom. You don't have rights. You're just enforcing your own rights.
I mean, if you want to define it as a kingdom, you can define it as a kingdom. It doesn't mean anything to me.
So I mean that would just mean that like the non-aggression principle is a right that needs to be enforced.
Well, then let's have a government with a monopoly on force to enforce it.
Well, I mean, we could argue that the
axiom. Right.
I mean, we could argue that the axiom of self-ownership is a right that does not need to be.
Self-ownership is not an axiom.
Self-ownership is not an axiom.
Oh, fucking hell. I did a video called Why I Don't Debate Anarchists, and I was right.
Well, I wouldn't really consider this a debate. We're just having a discussion here. I don't think anybody was really... We kind of just came in here. I think we're having just like an amicable discussion. I don't understand why you're getting upset. Like, I understand what you're putting forth, right? Like, you were just saying, oh, you're protecting your own little kingdom. And all I would say is that I think that's the best way in which to organize society is when people are responsible for their... if you want to word it that way, for their own little kingdoms, and then we can institute other people who have, if you want to call their business their kingdom, in which their kingdom can help my kingdom, protect my kingdom, if somebody else's kingdom, if you want to call it that, decides to aggress against me. Like, if we can use terms like this, but it doesn't really matter. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think, defining it in one way or another, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, doesn't really change anything.
Well, okay, at the root of the existence of rights and at the root of the existence of civilization itself is philosophy, for sure.
What do you mean?
That the philosophy behind the Constitution of the United States is materially different from the philosophy behind the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. Materially different, and actually makes a difference in people's lives.
Right.
So philosophy is at the base of all of this.
I would argue that rights only exist in like a negative sense. Like, okay, so like, for example, like, I have freedom of speech. Whether a government protects that or not is moot. Like, it doesn't really matter. You still have that innate right, and I think that comes from self-ownership. Whether you want to call it axiomatic or not, I don't think it really matters to me anyhow. Like, I can use my body in the ways that I please, that is not affecting the way other people have used their body, and that's not something that needs to be recognized by an overarching thing, because that's not something that requires recognition. It's just innate.
You're claiming that as a moral concept. You're saying morally you have the right to protect your life whether there's a government that recognizes that right or not. And I agree. That's why we should build governments that recognize that right. And that's why the Constitution of the United States is important, because it is in cahoots with your views.
I don't think it is at all.
Yeah, I mean...
to the extent that it protects rights.
I mean, you mean, okay, so if you were to say, like, a constitution in general, like, I don't agree with, like, the United States Constitution on a few points. just in like the its own existence of how it operates and how it distributed power and judiciary review and all this stuff and amendments and quite literally allowing. I mean, the Constitution doesn't mean anything because it can just so like first, like it doesn't even if you have a government that recognizes certain rights, what if the government decides to transgress against those rights?
Then we're in possibly a state of revolution, like when the police stand by and let private businesses be looted. Then we're getting close to a state of civil war.
Okay, but the state has been not recognizing right. Like, if you believe like the things in the Constitution are rights given to us by the Constitution, then we've been in a state of revolution for the last 200 years.
I wouldn't say they're given to us. I would say they're protected by.
Okay, even if you say they're protected by, they're not protected by, because a lot of these rights have been, quote, taken by the very government that is supposed to protect them. And so, like, under your own definition, that would mean that we've been in a state of revolution since, like, what's it called? The Alien Sedition Act, or even, like, because that is unconstitutional. But that was John Adams. That was the second president of the United States.
Yeah, I would bring up your point of equilibrium. There are outlying cases, and then there's equilibrium. And the outlying cases would be things like
the outlying cases set the precedent.
The Great Depression, the Civil War, the existence of slavery. Those are outlying cases.
Okay, so do you believe that taxation, like, do you believe that involuntary taxation is like it is justified?
Not really. I think we should have a system of voluntary taxation.
Since the 16th Amendment, the government has been, and this isn't an external case, like since the 16th Amendment, every single day, if you go to work, you have your part of your rights that are supposed to be protected by the government transgressed against. So we've been in a state of revolution in that sense since 1916. Yes or no?
No, you're defining revolution far too. If the police stand by and don't enforce the law.
I asked you, what would happen if the government did not respect the rights that they're supposed to protect? And you said that would be in a state of revolution. And I'm simply posing you with a real life example of a right that they are supposed to protect but aren't protecting. And by your own definition, that would mean we're in a state of revolution.
All right. Well, you're straw manning me. You're taking.
Okay. I'm sorry. If I am, I'm sorry. Please explain.
So if the police are standing by and not enforcing the law, that's a state of revolution. If the law is egregious, that's not necessarily a state of revolution, although it could be. It could be.
Okay. So what do you do to protect against these egregious laws?
You fight within the system, because if you're going to go outside the system, that's a revolution. Now, sometimes you have to. I'm totally in favor of the Second Amendment, and I don't think it's for hunting.
Okay, so fight within the system, how?
By electing Trump and then supporting him, for example.
Okay, so and even within the system, like it's subject to, say, if we elect somebody, the person that we elect, first of all, it's majority election. In your not right now, but like in the system that you want, would it be like a majority election?
Yeah, because it's rule of the majority or rule of the minority.
Okay, so who's to say that the 51% is right and the 49% is wrong?
The Constitution will not allow certain things. You can't just do certain things.
Okay, but
in the Constitution.
Who can't just do certain things?
The government. Society.
Okay, but what if they do those certain things? What if they do those things?
Well, then we might end up in a state of civil war. We could be in a state of civil war if that happens.
Okay, so your government doesn't solve the only problem that you posed with anarchism, that it would be in a constant state of war.
You want a utopia?
You pose this idea. Hold on, you pose this idea that there's nobody to protect these rights, but even the government itself doesn't actually have to protect the rights. And if you want it right now doesn't protect rights, and you say the people should do this, the people should do that. Well, it's predicated upon people knowing what they should or should not do, and it doesn't matter. The government does what it wants, And it doesn't matter because for example, you could be completely morally opposed to everything going on in the Middle East right now. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you have to pay your taxes, which are going to funding these wars, these wars, these drone strikes, whatever. It doesn't matter because they have this monopoly on the use of force and violence over this given territory. You have no say in anything that happens. Even if you elect people, these people are just simply representatives, and I wouldn't even use that word, because the idea of representation is completely like ambiguous. Because say I elect Donald Trump because he says he's going to protect the Second Amendment, and then he doesn't protect the Second Amendment, because these representatives have their own concords that they want to, like, they have their own ideas, that they have their own goals, their own motives, and they can run on a campaign of lies. It doesn't matter. And
it does matter. It does matter. If he just lies to us, if he lies to us, he won't get reelected. I mean, if he's
already lied to us, and he's going to get reelected.
Yeah, because I don't think he's lying to us.
He said he was going to cut military spending, and he's raised it. So he's already lied to us. So it doesn't matter, because the people don't really care about being lied to, at least to a certain degree.
Yeah, so there are consequences to what politicians do. Now, you're saying it's not a perfect system. Agreed.
I'm not saying it's not perfect. I'm saying it's inherently egregiously flawed.
And what would you replace it with? Look, I agree with Churchill's estimation. Democracy, or constitutional republic, is the worst government except for all the others.
Okay, and I would reject the notion that you need an overarching government. It goes back to where.
So you'll just have little kingdoms.
If you want to call it that, sure.
Everybody will just
want to call it that.
Protect their own little kingdom.
It be societally recognized, but it doesn't have to be recognized through a central body. And if it's not recognized,
what would it be recognized through?
Say Joe Blow doesn't recognize it. He gets blacklisted from society, because society, we have set a precedent for how we're going to operate.
Yeah, blacklist is just another word for prison.
No. Sure, sure, but okay, so you decided to operate outside of, like, the moral rule, the moral framework. You can call it prison. It doesn't really matter. You operate within, like, the moral rule, like so say the NAP, whatever. If that's the precedent that you set, you don't need a central body to enforce that, because the people can enforce it themselves, and you can have arbitration agencies or whatever. And if they decide that they don't care, they're like, I don't care what your arbitration agency says, I don't care what your private contractual law says. People can do that now. People can say they don't care about the current law, and they can break law. People still murder, people still rape, people still steal, and there's punishments for those people. In the same way that if somebody comes onto my property and rapes my wife, and that I can seek retribution against him now, and in a society without an overarching government.
Right, but if you were to go out and hunt down your wife's rapist right now, instead of calling the police, then you would end up in prison.
I would still have, if I were to hunt down and kill my wife's rapist in an ANCAP society or whatever, and if that would be violating the moral tenet upon which society has agreed upon under, like, at some level, then I would be in violation of that, and I would still be, like, his family could seek retribution against me for murdering their family member.
Yeah, that sounds like anarchy to me.
Okay. I mean, that's what I want, is anarchy. So, like, you saying that isn't, like, a derogatory thing to me.
So anarchy doesn't necessitate that I say Bob, he has a ranch, and say Joe, he robs Bob from whatever his possession, his TV, right? It doesn't say that Bob has to go after him. Bob can pay into a service that would protect his property in case such an event were to happen. It could work similar to like an insurance or any mutual aid program.
It could be run through a covenant community. There's many. So I can.
Those are all concepts that happen underneath a monopolized use of force. All those concepts you think would still be there in a state of anarchy would not be there.
They can't
substantiate why they wouldn't be there.
Because they occur inside of a system where people have to deal with each other voluntarily based on retribution from the government, physical force from the government. That's why
Okay.
people
And if
voluntarily train.
And if we set a precedent and people deny that precedent, and if a private company can still exist, there's more private security now than there is, and I understand that still they operate under the framework that you set forth.
Yeah.
But there's still a frame. I'm not saying there's not a framework. There's still a framework.
Well, there wouldn't be an anarchy. And if there is, then
still
what's
be
the difference? What's the difference then? Why aren't we in the state of anarchy in the United States? Voila, you've already got it. Your ANCAP society is here.
What? I'm sorry. I've completely lost where you're at.
Victory!
Okay. I mean, I'm. Never mind. Does anybody else want to say anything?
Well, he went on to say, MrCropper, you said that those firms have to exist under a overarching government. Well, a firm that creates law cannot exist under, government unless that government allows it. So, it's like you have to operate by the law of the entity that has a monopoly of force.
Right.
And that's why we don't see firms that I have proposed or anything around here, because the central authority will coerce them or force them to not do that.
Yeah, what if my firm says that your firm is a danger because you're not wearing masks, so we come in and arrest you all?
Well, that would be stupid for a firm to do that because
have you ever heard of anybody doing anything stupid, like Hitler invading Soviet Russia? Of course, people do stupid shit.
That's stupid on a much larger scale that you get with a central authority. But what I'm saying is decentralized firms that would have much more reason to not commit violence because
okay. So there is an actual direct act of recourse, so if a firm were to try and enforce something like that, well, first of all, it would be based off of if I'm on somebody's roads and those the person that owned those roads have rules. If he wanted to enforce something, then he could. Hush. But there's actually so if there's a certain arbitration agency or whatever that has decided to take certain actions, there's direct recourse against them. You can choose not to use people who use that service. You can choose not to use these services, stuff like that. With the government, if the government says that they want to enforce mask laws or whatever, you have no recourse against that. You either do it or if they're actually enforcing the law, if they set the law and they're enforcing it, there's nothing you can do except agree to it or go to jail. There's no actual recourse against them. And at the end of the day, you still actually have to pay your taxes to pay for those systems that are oppressing you.
Yeah, it's not.
You have no recourse against them.
Yeah, it's not a perfect utopia, but if there's no central authority, then it's just rule of the strongest, and it's just the biggest security force enforcing whatever they want to enforce. And you might say, well, that would be irrational for them to do X, Y, or Z. It doesn't matter to them. If they are not rational, then they're not rational. And what was rational about Hitler? Hitler was the most insane person ever.
Okay, and Hitler rose to power under a state, under a government. So you saying that what was Hitler? It does not. It's begging the question. It's not something that is solved within a society that has a state, because somebody like that clearly through history can rise to power.
Yeah, and there's a big difference.
And you're talking about an armed society in which people would be allowed to essentially nobody could stop you from.
They would be allowed.
Okay. So I'm sorry. I misspoke. They would be able to purchase whatever they could appropriate by their own means. And this is an armed society, right? There's no limitations on these types of things other than my insurance agency might say, hey, I don't want you collecting nukes in your basement because, that could be pretty dangerous. So I'm going to jack up your premiums, or I'm not going to cover you, because you would have an insurance agency that could underwrite your actions and say, if I transgress against Bob and Bob takes me to arbitration, well, my insurance agency would cover that and look at a social score type deal. But anyways, regardless, in an armed society, people would be able to protect themselves better.
They'd
A
have
security force, a security force could arise today. Oh, no, security force, whatever. A giant militia could be formed, and they could stake their claim over a given territory and say, "We rule here." It's begging the question. It's not solved inside a society with a state. It doesn't answer the question.
Right.
You're simply posing an issue. That
re-
issue is not solved within a stated society.
To return to my point earlier, it's not simply saying that a state exists that solves these problems. It is deeper than that, and it is philosophy that solves these problems. Like the right against unreasonable search and seizure, or the right against self-incrimination. Those.
Okay, so when people when the government violates, when the police officers violate those rights to search and seizure, we have no-knock warrants that are in place in many states, and I think that violates people's rights. They could say that they smell marijuana in your car. I think that violates that right, because you can't actually prove that somebody smelled something or didn't smell something, right? So these rights get violated all the time by the government, and we don't really have any recourse against that.
Yes, we do have recourse. Look at the fact that marijuana is legal in 27 states now. We do have recourse.
Okay, and how long did that take?
Well, fair enough. Prohibition happened, but we did away with it. Now you can buy alcohol again. Look, I didn't say it's a perfect system, but it's far better than not having any system at all.
I would disagree.
No system at all is better?
I would agree that. Well, it's not that there's no system. It's not enforced by a central body upon which everybody has to agree to. For no other reason, even if you wanted to say, from a consequentialist standpoint, that the government, it has to exist because it has to exist, that how do you legitimize the state from a perspective? If you believe in rights and that these rights are protected by the government, how do you actually legitimize the existence of the state through a social contract?
Voting.
The social contract doesn't exist.
Voting.
If I get born into a society that I don't want to take part in, right? If I get born within the borders of a state,
well,
so I'm just subject to that?
It's a free country in America. You can leave.
Okay, and go where?
To a worse place.
I mean, okay, so you can say, oh, you can just leave, but there's no viable better option. What I'm saying
is
for example,
best.
I think
it's the best place in the world. So you could leave if you want to.
I would agree with you that it is the best place, but that doesn't. It's the best of the worst places. I think most countries are pretty. So it's the best of the worst places right now. So sure.
So get a gun, keep a gun, know how to use it in America.
I have a gun. I keep a gun. I know how to use it, but that doesn't mean that I don't still have to pay taxes. That doesn't mean that all these rights that the government is supposed to be protecting, they're not protecting. So the recourse against that is I hope that I'm within the majority. I hope that I'm within the majority and elect somebody that stays true to the campaign they run on and actually get change done, which doesn't happen.
Your whole argument is the best place in the world is not perfect, therefore let's do away with it. That's just insane.
That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying
I'm
saying there is something better. Okay, this is such such a conservative talking point. We live in the best. You're complaining about women have rights in America. Just look at them compared to people in the Middle East. I don't care if it's the best place right now. I'm saying there can be something better. Just because we're the best right now does not mean we can't strive to be better than where we're at right now. That's such a ludicrous notion.
Yeah, anarchists seem to me to be spoiled, clueless people. They live in the best place in history, even if you're in Germany.
And I am thankful for that. But I want what is best. If you want to call that spoiled,
well then let's
I will not settle for mediocrity. I won't settle for mediocrity.
Okay, then
if you call me spoiled for saying I want to settle for mediocrity, that's absurd to me.
Then let's
I'm
argue.
Sure living under the colonization of the British was probably the best thing at the time. Are our founding fathers spoiled for thinking that they could have something better?
No,
that is a ludicrous notion.
No, then let's argue about what needs to be changed in the Constitution. What is insufficient in the Constitution?
And I would argue that the very existence of the state and the Constitution perpetuates these problems, and the problems that we have today will never be solved through a state.
Well, doing away with the Constitution would lead to something more like Germany or Soviet Russia, where it's just a rule of man over humans and there's no law.
Yes, Germany and Soviet Russia, in which the people were democratically elected. That's doing away with the Constitution would put those people in power.
Soviet Russia, they were not elected in Soviet Russia.
Okay, so they had a revolution, and then after Lenin, they democratically elected the people that were within the council, and then from the council decided who would lead.
Now, if you know the history of the council, they actually declared a recess, and when the opposing party left, the ones who were remaining named themselves the Bolsheviks, without the other party in the room. And the Bolshevik is Russian for majority.
Okay, and
so that was a coup.
That happened under.
That was a coup. It was a coup.
It happened. Okay. So a coup can happen, and then power can change, and then what do the people do? It's like
to return to my point. Philosophy is really the subject here, not how the state does this or that. It's the philosophy of what we enforce. If you want to
talk about philosophy, how do you legitimize the state?
I legitimize the state. I legitimize the state by standing in front of the state with my gun and protecting the state. That's how I legitimize the state that I live under, by using my gun to protect it.
Okay, what if I don't want to live under that state?
Then you had better leave my state alone, or else my state and my army will kill you. So you go off and do your own thing.
So you have a problem with my small kingdoms, but you want to enforce a big kingdom. So you're talking about like if somebody steps on that.
I don't want to enforce.
Okay, so I have to leave, or you're gonna kill me. Your army will come after me. So your kingdom will come after me.
No. If you try to violate my rights,
okay,
then my state will put you in prison or kill you.
Okay, and what if it's the state doing the violating?
Well, then I'm going to do everything I can, including move out of that country.
Okay, well, this country is violating your rights right now, yet you live within it.
Yeah, because where would I go? It's the best place in the world.
Okay, exactly. Where would you go? So even if the state's violating your rights, but it's the state that violates your rights the least, you're satisfied with that?
No, I don't. I'm not satisfied. That's why I support Trump.
Okay, so, so you support Trump. Like, okay, will you substantiate like a reason like why you think support Trump?
Because he slashed the EPA to pieces. That's one reason, just one reason.
Okay.
The Environmental Protection Agency is neutered. He cut their balls off. They can't do anything anymore.
Okay, in the process, he restricted our Second Amendment rights. He imposed tariffs. He instituted red flag laws.
All right, you're saying this is not perfect utopia? Boo-hoo, we're not in kindergarten anymore.
I'm not saying not only is it not I don't care about it being a perfect utopia. I'm saying that just because you believe you have a certain outlook on how America should be, and you're within the majority, it doesn't mean anything. Because what right do you have, you want to talk about rights and philosophy, what right do you have to impose your ideals on anybody else?
I believe you have the rights you're willing to enforce and fight for. You have the rights that you have the rights that you're willing to fight for, and no other rights. None. Only the rights you're willing to fight for.
Me fighting for my rights that I believe that I have is inherently what did you say? Childish and spoiled. I'm willing to fight for those rights, and therefore I'm spoiled.
No, I said
because I believe that I have rights, and that I will never truly that not just me, but the people that come after me, and the people that come after them, and the people that come after them, will not have these rights under a constitution.
Government, it's in the nature of government power to grow, right? Jefferson said that. So
okay.
So we don't live in a perfect utopia. That's the only point you keep returning to this. It's not perfect. It's not perfect. I'm not saying
we don't live. That's not the only point I'm making. I'm saying that there is something better, and I've established what I thought was better.
That's what I just said. This isn't perfect. We could improve it.
We're going in circles here. Like I don't really.
I'm out of.
You've established it's not perfect, so you will settle, and you say you're not settling, but you are settling because you're like, oh, he got rid of the EPA. I don't care about the other rights that he violated.
No, I didn't say I don't care about the others. You said give me one reason why I support Trump.
You said boo-hoo. That's you not caring.
Okay, I do care about marijuana being illegal. I think it should be legal. I don't
Okay.
think Trump should have instituted red flag laws, but the day after he did it, he started harassing the Democrats about it by threatening to use it against them. So he's a pretty funny guy that way. So it's not perfect. But
So in his second term, when he's not up for re-election anyways, and he decides to do all these terrible things that you disagree with, so you elect somebody new, somebody different that runs on a campaign, and they say they're going to do this, this, and this, and then they don't do it. There's no direct discourse against like laws you don't agree. Excuse me. You have indirect discourse, and I would say that indirect discourse is very, very loose, because not only do you have to be within the majority to get a change, it's once you are within the majority and you vote somebody up, it's up to their like subjective evaluations on what they can accomplish and what they actually want to accomplish and whether they will accomplish those things. So it's like an entirely.
So-
I'm just.
instead of doing philosophy, which is hard, let's just do away with the government and try to keep all the things we like about freedom except the government. That's what I'm hearing from you. Let's have freedom, but no government.
Well, if we're talking about philosophy, we can talk about philosophy, but what do you
I'm gonna use your
think is the philosophical method of fixing problems?
What is the philosophical method of fixing problems? Was that the question?
Yeah, because you're saying we should do philosophy instead of whatever else.
We should talk philosophically about what the government should be doing. Should the government be making marijuana illegal, for example? That's a philosophical issue. Should the government...
That's relegated to the philosophical belief in government. What if there's a philosophical belief in no government? That would go against going through the means of government.
It is possible for people to hold ideas that are so dangerous that your only recourse is to kill them.
So you're saying if I believe in no government, I ought to die?
No, I didn't say that. I said some people can hold ideas that are so dangerous that they need to be killed.
But you said that ideas in relation to me saying the belief in no government.
Yes. If you believe X, and X is a danger to my life, I might not have any other recourse than to kill you. That's called war.
Okay. Now, if I say that X idea empirically, through the facts of nature, does not go against your right to life, and in fact actually promotes your right to life even more than the current system, how would you react to that?
Well, if I agree with you, then I'd be on your side. If I disagree with you, then we would be at war.
Okay, so
then we'd have to talk about what those ideas were.
but you're relegating that only reform and ideas can be done through voting or means of government.
Yeah, only through government. That's true. And however you define government, yeah, yep,
So
that's
then-
going to be true
so
in
then-
your system too.
Yeah, there can be government. I mean, well, okay, I mean state. There can be government within my system, but yeah, if it's relegated by means of the state, then I don't think we can ever talk about my system because you're only for reform through the use of state.
You're not proposing a system. You're proposing doing away with the system.
I'm promoting a system of. I mean, markets are system. It's a system.
No, markets are something that arise within a system where trade is voluntary on pain of prosecution by the government authority.
A market happens when it's preferable to trade over whatever. Now, an authority using force can be a reason that it's preferable, but it's not the inherent reason. I could want to trade with John because I might not want to have John attack me, or I might value John's contribution to society. Why would I go to the small business around the corner and steal from them if I value the service that they provide?
Maybe you're
If I
short-sighted.
am a regular customer.
Maybe you're short-sighted and you would rather have something for free today than work for it and get it tomorrow.